Good morning. Here we are today. Going to cover some interesting topics. First, I want to do a little bit of full disclosure regarding some previous talks about the SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 illness that's running rampant right now. The governor of Texas, a buddy of our dear, sweet, beautiful president, Donald Trump, who, for whatever reason, is running roughshod on our medical community, doing his standard dance of, listen to me, I know better than people who have studied viruses, are epidemiologists, and have been doing these sorts of studies for decades. And that's not to say that this virus couldn't potentially be man-made or at least man-altered. But regardless of how this virus came to be, it is most certainly causing enormous problems throughout the United States, specifically because we are too stupid to understand that wearing masks, both sides, whether you're sick or not, can help reduce the spread. Viruses have only a couple of mechanisms for spreading. And in this particular instance, while it seems that the virus is not easily transmissible in the air, being in close contact with people and not wearing a mask, where you may come in contact with droplets from people exhaling, coughing, laughing, sneezing, speaking loudly, this is where the viral load hits an order of magnitude that could be potentially harmful, versus just passing someone on the street when walking is likely to not cause too much distress. This virus is not as bad as we thought. However, as we can see, if given the opportunity, if we continue to let this thing grow and spread, it will find ways of mutating. It will find ways of becoming more problematic. And for those that say an asymptomatic individual will have little to no issues, there have been plenty of studies out there, and I encourage you to use this incredible tool called the internet to look it up. But there are certainly at least a few anecdotal stories and moreover ongoing evidence that at best, if you are asymptomatic, there could potentially be permanent damage to your lungs, since that is the main part of your body where this particular virus is able to latch on and wreak its havoc. So even if you think you're asymptomatic, even if you think this virus will not get to you, even if you have no reason to believe that you will become sick or that this will harm you, for the sake of those around you, for the sake of older folks in your family, for the sake of people that you may interact with that you don't know are immunocompromised or are in chemotherapy or within the category of a litany of other afflictions that may not be presentable on the surface, do it for them. I can't teach you or force you to be empathetic. That's just something you should do on your own. And this cockamamie bullshit about your individual freedoms and liberties, those end at someone else's freedoms and liberties. So if you are inherently doing dangerous, stupid shit, like running around without a mask because you feel like it is infringing on your rights as an American, you might be right, but you're also an asshole. Now, while we know one thing for sure, and that is that we're not sure how this virus originated, anyone who tells you full front that there is no way this could have happened in a lab clearly doesn't know that labs in China and abroad have been studying coronaviruses and editing them for years. This is not new, and this is not necessarily malicious. This happens pretty often. As viruses in our communities, the more we take away space from animals, the more that we occupy their space, the more likely we will encounter various mutated strains, the more we will encounter different types of, whether it be SARS or MERS or avian flu or whatever, the more we inhabit those spaces and the more we allow these viruses to jump zoonotically from animal to human or from animal to intermediary to human, the more we will need to study these viruses and find ways to combat them preemptively. So take that as you may, and we will jump into some other topics that I think you guys will enjoy today. So give it a few, and here we go. What is up, good sir? How are you doing, my friend?
Good.
A little intro before you got here, just telling people how fucking stupid they are for not wearing a mask because apparently it's infringing on their First Amendment rights. Little do they know their First Amendment rights end at someone else's pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. And if you're getting me sick, you are inherently stepping on all three of those fucking things. So you're a piece of shit if you're not wearing a mask in public spaces.
Pretty much. And it's really hilarious that 28 states are reporting, or cases are on the rise in 28 states. And it's just Florida right now. They put a mask mandate. This has just happened a few hours ago.
Texas did too.
They put a mask mandate in Florida, and they're rioting the mask mandate. All meanwhile, while there's 9K new cases just yesterday alone. How are these people that stupid? Stop it with the bullshit, bro.
When you're eating from the trough of Donald J. fucking Trump, it's really hard for you to possibly imagine that maybe the left-wing media sometimes gets things right. And that's not to say that they don't have plenty of bias and bullshit, because Lord fucking knows the left is just as bad as the right. There is no one is better or worse than the other. But I will say, in fairness to the left, they will at least back up and acquiesce to the recommendation of doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, because, well, you know, they've studied that shit for fucking at least 8 years with their school bachelor's degree and their master's degree. And if they go into getting a PhD, it's just absolutely fucking unbelievable, where the guy who I fucking know didn't graduate high school is fucking coming on YouTube with his tinfoil hat saying, well, you know, let me tell you my professional experience as a what? Fucking toilet sitting tweeter? That's what you're telling me? I should listen to you?
Armchair quarterbacks all day, bro.
Dude. Well, here's the thing. Viruses are not fucking partisan. They don't give a shit. Like, if they were partisan, if this was a Chinese virus that was a hoax exacerbated by Democrats, why is it Texas and Florida are two of the highest rising states with cases? Yeah, California is too, but, you know, California has its own fucking myriad of problems.
Yeah, seriously. It's stupid. I think when you talk about, like, you know, the bipartisan and obviously Democrats, and obviously they lie, they're biased, they lie too. Here's the thing, when you look at a situation like this, I think it's imperative to always take the side that's going to err on the side of safety, right? That's your first rule. It doesn't matter if that was the conservative side, then I'd be following the conservative side too. And
well, here's the thing. What's the worst thing that happens by wearing a mask in public? Like, this idea that you can get hypercapnia is a fucking absolute joke, because here's the thing. There are surgeons that are performing 12, 18-hour surgeries straight. They're wearing these masks, and these masks are far more face fit than a cloth bandana. So if you're telling me that a cloth bandana is going to give you hypercapnia, then you probably should be on some sort of breathing machine anyways.
Yeah.
Because there's absolutely no truth to that. You would have to be wearing an airtight mask or something so tight around your face that you're literally breathing in your own CO2. But these masks are so loosely fitted. I mean, all they're really designed to do is to prevent viral load from transmitting, because in open air, you're probably not going to get it. But if you're in close contact with somebody who's coughing or laughing or yelling loudly, that viral load is orders of magnitude larger than someone just breathing. And that's where these masks come into play.
Well, I think the masks, more importantly than that, are honestly, and I think what people really don't understand is the idea of a mask isn't necessarily for yourself. It's for other people.
Exactly.
Right? We know that COVID has up to a 14-day incubation period. So it means you could be sick for 14 days before you even show one single symptom, right? And then on top of that, your symptoms are going to build up slowly. So they'll start with a cough, with this and that. So when you're out in public, and if you're sick and you don't know it, you're going to be unknowingly spewing your sickness everywhere. And that's why you wear a mask. And I think this is why this is why America looks like a joke to the rest of the world right now,
that's
right?
why this disease is so much worse than other degrees too, man, is that, like, you can be asymptomatic and spread it, which is something that is not inherently common among a lot of other diseases. Like, you have to be showing signs of being sick or pre-symptomatic before you can actually transmit it, right? But if you're asymptomatic, and not only can you transmit it while being asymptomatic, but even if you think this virus is not doing anything to you, there have been studies that have come out that have shown that people that are asymptomatic are still experiencing 10 to 25% lung capacity effect.
Reduction, yeah.
You know, scar tissue building up in your lungs. And guess what? This isn't the liver, so it doesn't regenerate. Like when your lungs start deteriorating, you know, when they start getting deep scar tissue like that, it's really hard for it to just rebuild.
Rebuild, right? Lungs will actually recover, but the COVID is starting to, what they're noticing is that COVID's starting to prevent your lungs from recovering. And this means that if you are a smoker, you'll never get better, even if you quit smoking. And if you're a runner and you stop running and you start getting, you know, I guess out of shape, you're not going to recover from that anymore, because if you get COVID. So I think a lot of people are so focused on this really, really, really small death rate, which is about 4 to 5% right now out of all those infected. But I think realistically, we should be just as concerned with the long-term health effects, right? Because, you know, it's already going to sort of suck to get old, but this is probably going to make getting old like 100% worse.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and
when you're 70, 80 years old and you can't breathe walking up the stairs.
Well, and here's the thing, right? They say, and you know, I've read a few studies recently about how this virus doesn't seem to mutate quickly, which is great, which means a vaccine that comes out would potentially be useful for a number of years, right? They wouldn't have to keep redoing it like they do with the regular influenza. However, that means that if this thing does mutate and mutates in a way that we're not ready for, it could be absolutely catastrophic. It could be somewhere between where we are now and the Spanish flu. And while people want to talk about the Spanish flu being, you know, several times worse than this, I mean, that was really before the advent of modern medicine. You know, like people were still in their infancy of using vaccines and whatnot. And guess what? If you go back to old 1918 photos, they were all wearing fucking masks, bro. Like,
well, half of them were, and then there was a half that wasn't. That's very ironically similar to what it is today. And there was a time period when they got it under control, and said group that doesn't like to wear masks because it infringed upon their freedom basically brought it back. Like we're
started running around peeing on each other, and then
now.
they fucking got sick again, and then it just spiked. And that's what they're saying. It's that the second wave. And here's the thing: America hasn't even flattened its curve. we're not even out of the first curve yet, dude. Did you see that graph that they showed where it's like EU is like this, like it went up and then just boom, it went straight down, and now it's like almost next to zero. And the US was like this, and it kind of went down, and now it's like we're like on a roller coaster. We're going back up.
Trevor Noah calls that flattening the curve because you have this upraise, right? And then it goes down and then it upraises again. He's like, hey, it kind of flattens up here.
Yeah, that's where America's flat.
The scary part about wave 2, and I cannot stress this enough, is the fact that because wave 1 is, they put all these projections out there, right? Millions of people are going to get it. Millions of people are going to die.
We've already got almost 1 million people in the United States alone.
But because that doesn't actually happen, right? Because we get it under control to a certain extent, people then tend to, like smart people realize we accomplished this because we did stay home and we did wear masks and we did our part. But dumb people think, oh, this is a hoax, this is some bullshit. And what ends up happening is wave 2 becomes a lot worse. And right now we're looking at a trajectory that puts the wave 1 numbers to absolute shame.
And people
Texas is rolling back their aggressive they wanted to aggressively get back to society. Now the governor of Texas has to eat his words and say, well, I fucked up on that one. The same with the Florida governor as well. It's like, dude, why couldn't you guys have just listened and did this to begin with?
You know, in some ways I have to, and this is not so much pointed at them, but for a lot of the small businesses that were basically kicked to the ground and said, figure your shit out, I can understand that if your entire livelihood depends on your corner store that you run or the family business that you've operated for 10 generations or whatever, the idea of shutting down once was a tough pill to swallow, but the idea of shutting down a second time without any financial help from the government is basically, I mean, what's worse, your family not being able to eat or getting sick from this virus? And I think the problem is that you have a federal government that's willing to hand out tens of millions of dollars to fucking Carnival Cruises, to fucking airline industries, but are making it almost impossible for these small businesses to jump through the SBA and legal loops in order to get their forgivable loans in order to keep people employed. Whereas the first thing that most European countries did was they implemented some sort of payroll maintenance plan where everyone was able to keep their jobs. None of these small businesses went under. And yeah, they ate a lot of money up front, but they flattened their curve. People were able to keep their jobs. The unemployment didn't skyrocket 15-20% like it did in the United States within a matter of weeks. It just goes to show that, when people tell you inherently that socialism is all bad, but then you see how socialized healthcare is helping people go to the doctor and it's reducing their infection rates and they're keeping their jobs and businesses aren't all going under. And then you compare that to what's going on in the United States, which is this fucking sick, purely capitalist, fend for yourself mentality.
Yeah.
Why the fuck are either of us still here, dude? Why the fuck aren't you in New Zealand? Why aren't I in fucking in Italy with my fam, dude? What the fuck am I doing here?
I just want to learn how to haka with my brothers and sisters down in my
Haka.
island and just live the wonderful life that is New
Right?
Zealand. And
then when
I know
and
you
your
want to live the wonderful life in your
dude, and then when you and your girl need a vacation, you can come to my house and just hang out for a month, 2 months while you go hop around the fucking European Union, where they will treat you, even if you're not a resident. They will just let you go to the doctor and pay $20 to get emergency room treatment. Whereas here, if you're not a citizen, you don't have health insurance, you might as well just kill yourself because you will not be able to pay that bill.
I think it's time to start realizing that capitalism is put in place and designed. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's absolutely designed to obviously promote growth in business to astronomical levels, but it's also designed to chain us into corruption. This has to be realized by now, right? Because the majority of the money is being made by politics, right? Politics and big business. We're not getting shit. We are not a benefactor of this system whatsoever.
And if socialism or Marxism or communism sounds like bad words to you, which, in some ways they can be, but it's really about who's running the show. Why can't we just call it compassionate capitalism? Why can't we have
not the same, though? And that's the problem. What you just highlighted right now is it's not the same. I think I told you the scale last time, right? Sure. You have communism on one side, capitalism on the socialism is right in the middle. It's not communism. And I'm tired of people saying that because it makes it seem like something that we want to avoid, and that's not true. Socialism is really just using your taxes, reallocating your taxes a lot more effectively to help those around you.
Well, that's why when people say, who the fuck is going to pay for it? Well, how about me? I'm already paying 25% in fucking taxes here in California.
Right. And where the fuck is that going? Oh, I'm sorry. It's going to line people's pocketbooks, bro. It's not going to do anything effectively.
Bombing countries in the Middle East. People want to talk about how Obama was a huge war hawk. Well, you know what? 2019 was the most bombs dropped by any U.S. president in the Middle East since fucking Bush. Over 5,000 bombs dropped in the Middle East versus Obama's highest year, which was 4,800 or something. Which not to downplay, what he did, because if you add up his previous 4 years to that, they were pretty gaudy numbers. But this idea that Trump is some fucking broker of peace in the Middle East is a fucking joke.
Did we forget how this year started with Trump killing the Iranian general? Like, did we forget that? Because it's been so long since like January, and there's so much shit that's happened, right? That was right before Kobe died. They bombed the fucking Iranian general.
Slightly before that, in the beginning of his presidency, he basically shook the hand of the prince who more or less had
Saudi Arabian prince,
Jamal Khashoggi, who was actually a U.S. fucking correspondent to the Washington Post.
Disgusting, dude. And let's not forget his attempted peace talks with Kim Jong-un. What are we doing?
Oh yeah, that went up in flames almost as immediately as he fucking flew back home.
Yeah, basically. I mean, North Korea. In fact, I think he actually managed to somehow piss off North Korea even more. I don't even know if I could blame him, because he went in there with his art of the deal. Like, we're going to totally help you guys out. Did nothing. Now they're even a worse spot. I don't know if you noticed this, but 2 days ago, North Korea just threatened us again through the Krakow in Russia. That's their political, I guess how they leak their information, but they've now threatened us again, which I like humor. I really do. And I'm very, very happy to get some here and there. And that's North Korea bombing anybody is always hilarious to me. But just the fact that he managed to ruin that relationship too, it's like,
I mean,
yeah. But that's where we're at. We're halfway through 2020. I saw the thing that you just
posted. My house is burning, so in order to put it out, I'm going to throw more gasoline on it. Like, yeah, okay. Like, let's make this problem worse. Sure. How can I do that? Yeah, let me throw a stick of dynamite into that fucking burning house. Like that. Like if I knock the house down entirely, then it won't be on fire, right?
It won't catch on fire though. It's a good point. I like I said, I like where we're heading right now into 2020 with the giant dust storm that's like growing over the ocean.
Dude, I think it's already hit the East Coast, man. Do you have that on your 2020 apocalypse bingo right after?
No, I didn't, dude. I had all out warfare was one of my.
Dude, I had giant asteroid, which I think I still might have a chance, because I know Jupiter's been flinging some our way, because Jupiter's like, fuck, dude, like these guys are out of their fucking minds.
Yeah, they gotta go. Yeah, no, I had that. The polar ice caps melting, probably us being attacked by
Dude, did
polar
you hear
bears.
that they had the warmest day on recorded
It was
record?
100 degrees in the
Dude,
Arctic
in the
Circle.
fucking atmosphere, in the lower atmosphere, it was like
Yeah,
fucking 77 degrees.
I know.
But no,
But
dude.
global warming's a joke too. Remember that.
Oh yeah, dude. Like for sure, definitely.
But
Like
can
once
I
New
highlight
Orleans is,
something here? It's the same logic with the masks. Like, why don't you just err on the side of let's protect the environment? It's the
dude,
same fucking logic.
dude, dude, dude. Look, you're preaching to the fucking choir over
Oh,
here.
I get that.
What would I rather do? Like, well, I could go to the doctor now because I feel a lump in my throat, so maybe I should have that checked out. You know what? It doesn't hurt right now, so I'm just gonna let it grow to the size of a fucking like 5 pound tumor, and then I'll go to the doctor. That seems like a way more logical solution than just being preemptive about my health, right? Why don't I just not lose 30 pounds since this fucking whole pandemic started? And instead, I'll just add another 30 pounds to me and I'll balloon to the point where I really do need some actual medical help, but I don't need it right now. So what's the point?
Right. We're going to continue to go ahead and let the polar ice caps melt until there's no planet
Yeah.
to
Who
save
needs
it.
New Orleans anyways?
I mean,
I mean, I love New Orleans, but like the point is just in the silliness of that statement, right? Like
yeah.
who needs New Orleans? People who live in New Orleans need New Orleans. Who needs
At the very least, right? Not to mention college kids everywhere.
or anybody that wants to have really good poutine?
Yeah, poutine, or jambalaya.
Dude, for real. I got to get out there one of these days, man. Everyone always tells me the same thing. The food is as good as anywhere you could have in the United States, if not.
Yeah, that's what I hear as well. I've actually never been to New Orleans either, but
Oh, dude, that sounds like a family trip once you guys get the vaccine going so you guys can make the trip. We'll have to do that because my girl keeps telling me I have to go and I've never been.
yeah, I think if you guys are ever into like going to Disney World, maybe we could stop by New Orleans for a couple of days and then hit Disney World in
She's never
Florida.
been there.
I've never been to Disney World either,
Yeah.
so
Well, she's never been to Disneyland. So it's not even just, she's never been to either. Yeah.
I didn't know that
You
still
you didn't know
existed.
people could live that kind of life? I didn't either, dude.
I mean, there's a Harry Potter theme park in Florida too, and like I feel like she would have went to that. I mean, I'm assuming
That's in
Olivia's a Harry
Universal Studios though, right?
Potter. There's the Universal Studios.
But that's what I mean. Like, I think the Harry Potter, like, there's a huge Harry Potter park in, I think, Universal Studios specifically.
It might be in Universal, or it might be next to it. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's standalone or what, but
It should
it's
be.
crazy. Even my Brazilian wife has been to Disney World though. I haven't. Like I said, it's
I feel like it's something. It's almost like one of those things where it's like an illusion of grandeur, right? Because you live in the United States, it's like it's there. I'll go there whenever. But if you're not
yeah,
from here, you're like, fuck, dude. I gotta go to Disney World. I gotta go to Disneyland. I gotta see, the big arch in St. Louis, which is really just a big fucking piece of metal,
yeah.
But like, dude,
Fly over St.
all
Louis,
these
you
things
get
I have to see, man.
it. I
Golden
saw
Gate
the
Bridge,
arch
like, dude,
flying
fuck
over,
that
and
bridge. I'd be
that's
stuck on
about
that
it.
bridge for hours. Fuck the Golden Gate.
Yeah. No, there's all those things, but yeah, dude, I don't know, man.
Well, look, those are the same people that are freaking out about Christopher Columbus's statue coming down in San Francisco.
Christopher Columbus was a horrific navigator, to say the least. But then his actions caused the greatest, most
Look,
disgusting mass genocide of
for
all
me,
time.
here's the thing, and I get this from family members, I get this from friends of mine. Well, if you start tearing this shit down, how are we going to remember? How are we going to remember history? And I'm like, well, let's see. There are these things called books.
Books.
There are these things called museums. There are these things called turning it into like a private. Like you don't have to necessarily have a Christopher Columbus or a Robert E. Lee statue or a Confederate soldier in the middle of like downtown. You can have it in a museum where you actually have, okay, here's the things that this person did that you might be able to see as beneficial, and here are the horrible things that they did too. The world wasn't created in a vacuum, right? People are inherently good and bad. And I think the issue that I have is, and someone in my family was like, well, what about the presidents on the dollar bill? What about this and that? I'm like, well, first of all, I don't think we should deify any person because we're all human and anybody has the potential to have made a horrible mistake, even if they did it in the most progressive and thoughtful way, right? Like, I don't know if necessarily people inherently do these bad things in a vacuum. They do it because they think it's what is called upon them by their country, right? And nationalism is a huge motivator for people to do horrific things. But
Right.
I don't think that we should deify anybody. We shouldn't have statues of, like, honestly, and I'll say this, and I know that there's plenty of folks that are going to get pissed off. No president should have a public statue anywhere. Put them in a fucking museum. That's where they belong.
Yeah.
They're,
I mean, they're supposed
they're
to be doing a
historical
thankless
figures.
job.
Even Jesus had hookers. Like, you know what I mean?
I mean, you're not wrong. I mean, this is the president's supposed to be just a thankless job, right? But at the end of the day, it's just a job.
Yeah.
And to your point, I don't think we should deify people. Like I get like we talk about Robert Lee, right? Robert Lee was probably the greatest United States general of all time, military mastermind of all time. There's almost no question about this, right? This is a man who graduated from West Point Academy without a single demerit. He's the only person to ever do that, right? Yes, he was a slave owner. He was a vicious slave owner during times when slavery was legal, and obviously the world had a different opinion on it. But he did some, obviously, those are horrible things, right? Does he need a statue? No, he doesn't need a statue. We should be able to read about this guy and how he somehow led a Confederate army to last in a war for 4 years, a war that they should have probably been defeated in like 4 months, and
Well, and at
whatnot.
the beginning of the war, they had the upper hand. Like they won the first couple of battles, and
They
shit.
won
Like,
for the first probably 2.5 years. They had the upper hand. Actually, the only reason why the Confederate army lost is because they were outnumbered severely.
yeah.
So Robert E. Lee had a famous
States.
quote. Robert E. Lee had a famous quote, and he said, "For every time a Confederate soldier dies, we have one to take its place. But for every time a Union soldier dies, there's 12 to take their place." And statistically, this is about accurate, right? So after he won a series of battles, this is why he invaded the North and he had battles at Antietam and then also Gettysburg, which everybody's heard about. He wanted to stop the war, so he went in and fought, and he thought maybe winning a decisive battle in the North would get Britain and France to actually help out the South.
It's funny because there's a lot of and it wasn't him specifically, but there were diplomats from the southern United States, or also known as the Confederacy, who actually went and pleaded to France and Britain in an effort to get them to join their side. But France and Britain, first of all, weren't in need of a ton of cotton. They'd already had supplies to last them a couple of years. And since the United States North, the Union, was far more industrialized, they could get far more equipment from the industrialized North than they could ever get from the South, because the South's primary staple with the advent of the cotton gin was still mostly producing cotton.
Was still producing cotton, right? Which is funny that you mentioned the cotton gin, and this is why a lot of people talk about the war being about slavery, which it obviously was not about slavery. Cotton gin made slavery.
You got to at least put an asterisk, because in some parts, because the states' rights was to still want to have subordinate slaves.
It was states' right, but it was really all about secession. The United States wanted to keep wanted to preserve the Union. Let's put it this way: if today we had a battle about slavery, most white people wouldn't want to fight a war of slavery. That's today in 2020. There's too many racist people for that. But back in 1865, when nobody liked black people, let's be realistic. No one's going to fight and die over slavery, and that's the hard pill to swallow. Meme. It's like the Civil War was not about slavery whatsoever. I mean, yeah, that's part of like you said, the states' rights. But
I wouldn't say whatsoever, but it may not have been like the catalyst. It wasn't the powder keg that necessarily set it off.
I'll tell you this: right at the beginning of the war, once people, because they had this romantic feeling about the war, like they would show up to battle sites and have picnics right outside and watch, right? Right after they realized this war was not some bullshit thing. It was a bloody, disgusting conflict. The North quickly changed their tactics and said, look, you keep your slaves. Let's just stop this war. Immediately. This was like less than a year into the war. The people were calling for it. The troops were calling for it. Everybody wanted to stop this war that was going to be a bloody, long conflict that pitted brother versus brother. So this notion that the North were these good guys that wanted to stop slavery and end, this horrible thing is completely false.
What do you say that the cotton gin was primarily an advent to enable people to produce more cotton? Because the cotton gin really just removed seeds, and that was more useful in like the deep central South where they weren't near the coast, because cotton that grows on the coast doesn't necessarily have those thick sticky seeds that are hard to remove from cotton, whereas in the more centralized part of the South, where there wasn't a lot of humidity, there wasn't a lot of like coastal land where they were growing cotton. So they still needed in some ways, and this is just a few anecdotal stories that I've read about how in some ways it may have even had them increase their need for man production, because they didn't, like, the cotton gin didn't pick the cotton for them, it just removed the seeds.
It removed the seeds, but honestly, it cut the work down. It was like 20-1. So realistically speaking, and what you have to understand is slavery wasn't expensive. You have to house the slaves. You have to feed the slaves. Then you have to constantly worry about slave uprisings, right? Owning slaves was not a profitable joint, at least not after a while, especially not after the cotton gin. So at this point, it was really more like the South saying, hey, you won't throw me a pass in football, I'm going to take my ball and go home. Right? This is eerily similar to the same things when you ask people to wear a mask or to make these changes and they feel like, oh, you're taking something away from me. Even if it's something that they don't actually need. They've always had this like little brother mind state where it's, you tell me I can't do something, then let me throw a temper tantrum about it. And start a 4-year fight, and that's.
Yeah, I think the tired trope from that particular contingency of people is to call Democrats anti-American, anti-establishment, whatever. And in some ways, they maybe are more the group these days that are anti-establishment, even though that's probably just a fucking rallying cry. Because in reality, they're just as deep in the pockets of the establishment as the right is. Like that's just a joke. That's all surface level finger pointing that they're doing. But this idea that they are supporting a Confederate legacy that literally lasted 5 years, you want to know what they have more ties to? Obama's presidency. Obama lasted 8 years, which is almost twice as long as the Confederacy was even a thing. So if you want to talk about touting your Southern heritage, well, your Southern heritage is far more Obama related than it is Confederacy related.
I'm sorry, dude, but you guys lost the war and you were obliterated, and that was that.
Dude. I mean, here's the thing: when you think of Germany, right? You don't. No, like if you ask those same people that are secessionists, even today, about Nazi Germany, a lot of them will even say, "Nah, dude, they shouldn't. Like they lost. Like they shouldn't even be flying that thing." And it's like, ding, 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 motherfucker.
Why is this even why is it even a thing, bro? Like, and your flag sucks too. It's just a rip off of the Union Jack UK flag. Get out of here with that shit. It's not even a pretty looking flag. Hey, honestly, this is
Stars
yet another
bars, bro. Stars and bars.
Stars and bars. This is another example of literally what I just said, where it's like, dude, you're trying to take something away from me, so let me just hold on to it for literally no reason other than the fact that I don't want to lose it.
They say that the last gasp of a dying ideology is that it foments and explodes in a last ditch effort to try and remain relevant, which I think is kind of at the point where we're at now, where you have, a fairly substantial but not overwhelming size of people that are inherently vehemently racist, or at the very least secessionist, which, two sides of the same coin, because you're basically touting, a bunch of treasoners who fought against the country that they were sworn to be a part of. And, here we are in 2020, where you have these groups that are out there fighting for their last little bit of land, their last little bit of space in what used to be in America that they quote unquote knew, talking about how, segregation and the civil rights movement was, hundreds of years ago. Like, dude, my grandparents were in their fucking 30s when that shit was going on. Like, don't tell me that this was fucking hundreds of years ago, dude. Like, read a fucking history book, man.
Read a history book is right.
But then, it has to be able to read.
To that point earlier, speaking of history books, it's always written by the winner. And kind of to tie off that quote, that's why I don't like when the North talks about, or people from the North, like, oh, we ended slavery. Bro, you just wrote the story that way, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I mean, dude, the Emancipation Proclamation basically.
I was literally about to talk about that too.
It basically was a document that said, look, we're not going to take away your slaves right now. That might be the end goal over the long haul, but right now you can keep them. We just don't want them to expand into the Western territories.
Basically, well, actually, the Emancipation Proclamation abolished slavery in slave-controlled states, but that is a very, very specific rhetoric that he used. He didn't abolish slavery, and at the time, slavery wasn't illegal. He didn't say in the North it's illegal too. He basically said, "Hey, South, guess what?
Delaware had a huge contingency of slave owners, actually.
Yeah,
during the Civil War.
He was like, "Look, you South, you guys just don't get to free slaves." And this was just a military tactician genius. And Abraham Lincoln, for all of his flaws, he was actually a really good president during wartime. And what this did was effectively tell the South, if you're a slave in the South, that, hey, you don't have to be there anymore, so you could revolt. So when he sent General Tecumseh Sherman down south in his Sherman's March to Atlanta, they stopped at every plantation on the way and said, look, you guys are free. You want to join us? And they're like, wait, we get to kill the people who had enslaved us for the last 30 years? Rah! Sign me up, because let's go. And that's basically what effectively ended the war. This was a strategy created by Ulysses S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln, and that's what ended up finally defeating the South in the Civil War.
Yeah, no, it's and I know that it's a tough pill to swallow when your team loses. It's hard. When the Warriors lost, when they were up 3-1 against LeBron James, it was a tough pill to swallow. But you know what?
Bro, I'm a Raider fan. We lose all the fucking time. I understand too.
Exactly. But you're also a Lakers fan, so so you got plenty of winning.
I guess, but I'm also a Sharks.
But not since 12?
2000 and
2010.
Last time, 2009 was the last time the Lakers won the NBA Finals.
I know they went back to back, so it was either 8-9 or 9-10.
I think it was 9-10. It was right before the Heat started their little four time.
Exactly, yeah, because I think in 2011 the Mavs were down 2-0 against LeBron James, and then went 4 straight.
2-1. They were down 2-1.
No, I thought it was 2-0. They lost
right?
they lost the first 2 games away, and then they won the next 4.
Pretty sure it was 1-1, and then the Heat won to go up 2-1, and then
In
they
any
never won
case,
again.
you had the powerhouse of Chris Bosh, Dwayne Wade, and LeBron James all in their prime, losing to fucking German Dirk Nowitzki, who couldn't cross over anything.
Dude, Dirk Nowitzki is one of the top 10 players of all time. There's no question about it. And here's the thing about
There's definitely a question about it, but I mean, I love a big, tall, skinny guy shooting threes.
Maybe top 15. I might have overly just touted because I'm German.
Look, if you single-handedly can beat that team of 3, because I mean, who was his number 2? Can you even name a second player on that? JJ Barea?
Jason Kidd.
Jason Kidd? Yeah, who was like
Tyson Chandler. Sean Marion was on that team. There were a lot of really good players.
That's what I'm saying, but those are a bunch of like anecdotal players. You know, they're all just like, you know, they're all extras. Whereas, who was his real number 2? His real number, okay, you could say his real number 2 is probably Tyson Chandler, but that's not the same as a Chris Bosh who can nail 20-foot fucking jumpers.
Sure. But here's the thing: the Mavericks were a much better coach team. Rick Carlisle, way better coach than at least at that time. There. Number 2, a big 3 never works. Doesn't work. And at least not in that style of big 3, right? Because when you have big 3, you have everybody making a big 3 contract. But inevitably, 3 players cannot be a max player on one team. And that's just how it is. And so Chris Bosh never amounted to being the big 3, even though he was a monster for the Toronto Raptors prior to that. But the fact is, if you have Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, what else do you really need? You need a deeper bench. That's what you need. And they didn't have a deep bench. They had bullshit players coming off, a bunch of people on their last-ditch effort to win a championship, and that's and they simply got out-coached. Rick Carlisle.
The Toronto Raptors, the year that they won the title, right? They had Kawhi Leonard, and they had Kyle Lowry, and then they had a deep-ass fucking bench. Like that's the reason they won.
Bench, exactly.
Along with the Warriors being entirely fucking sick and dead, effectively from 5 straight years of going to finals, they also had probably by far the deepest bench because the Warriors had to get rid of so many players. They couldn't afford to keep them all. You give Clay a near max contract. You give Curry a max contract. You give Draymond Green almost $20 million a year. You know, Iguodala still getting 18 a year. Like you can't afford to keep all that.
You just can't. I'm not convinced that the Raptors beat the Warriors if the Warriors don't have injuries, but at the same time, sometimes it's in many ways you want to know if.
I forgot. They also still have Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant.
And when you don't have Kevin Durant, when he obviously tears his Achilles, that's sort of a huge difference, right? And remember, he had to sit out games too, just because he was losing knee injuries, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not really convinced that a fully healthy Warriors team gets beat by anybody, but the Raptors team was really good, and that is an example of a very deep bench and a really well-run team. I'm telling you, the number 1 recipe for a good team successfully in history is look at the Bulls, right? You have Michael Jordan, the alpha male. There's literally no question. He can do whatever he wants with the ball, right? Then you get a very, very, very good facilitator in Scottie Pippen, and you put him right next to him.
Who's also probably the best 2-way player on that team.
Yeah, well, absolutely, 100%, right? And he's incredibly intelligent as well. And you start there, and that's that. Like you get Dennis Rodman, who are like, oh, it's a big 3, it's a big 3. No, Dennis Rodman is not a big 3 type player. This is a guy who'll score 1 point, who'll get 22 boards, right?
It's if you want to call him big 3.
His style fits that team because he rebounds so well. He plays defense. He beats people up. Like that's something that you can add to Michael Jordan without taking away anything from Michael Jordan, right? You add Chris Bosh to scoring to what? to LeBron James, to Dwayne Wade. They don't need help scoring. So at this point, if you can't catch rebounds and you can't play defense, it's not worth it. Like you're not really adding anything to the team. So you look at these styles, I think building around one player is very similar to what the Raptors did last year. You have Kawhi Leonard, and you have a bunch of players who play incredibly well around Kawhi Leonard. If the same is it's happening with the Milwaukee Bucks. You have Giannis Antetokounmpo, and you have a team that's really well designed after him, but there's not a lot of like extra.
Number 2, I think, is Chris Middleton still. So like they have a really good number 2 in Chris Middleton, and then you have the rest of the team, which is a bunch of just bruisers and ballers who know how to play as a team.
And a lot of 3-point shooters on that team, right? Because you have Giannis who could take the ball to the hoop at will. So just surround him.
Dude, from the 3-point line, he can dunk in 2 steps, dude.
Yeah, from half court.
Yeah, dude, it's insane. That guy's wingspan is like a fucking pterodactyl.
Yeah, pretty much. And he's like twice as aggressive as a pterodactyl too. So Probably because I guess I've never met a pterodactyl, but I've seen Giannis
I don't
play.
think we want to be honest, dude. Those things are like fucking 8 feet tall with like a 20-foot wingspan. I'm not trying to fuck with a pterodactyl.
Honestly, though, I would rather probably fuck with a pterodactyl than stand in the way of Giannis and Acapulco when he's driving to the net. I like my chances with the pterodactyl, bro.
I guess, man. Those are some fucking fierce talons and beaks you got to get out of the way of. But, Giannis looks like he's on a fucking mission to just run you the fuck over, dude.
You probably just insta die, bro. I'm not a basketball player. I'm not that big. So,
yeah, dude. I'm going to share something with you because how remiss would we be if we didn't cover some shit about, the police? Where is it?
Oh, yeah.
This right here. Have you heard about this story?
I saw this. He's having literal death threats, and it just seems like nobody gives a shit. I mean, honestly.
I mean, dude, here's the problem, right? Is I guess there's a law that exists where you can't prosecute someone for saying something. They have to actually try to do it, or like money has to change hands or whatever. But you have literally folks like this is a name I recognize. I don't know who it is, but I feel like I've seen this name before, and not just like within this letter, but like, look at this stuff, man. These are the people that have sworn or did swear to protect people's inalienable rights, which, guess what, includes the BLM protests, whether you agree with their methods or not. That's not the point. Need a sniper, need to be put down, cutting the head off the snake. Like, what the fuck is this?
I would never call it violence, but if there was a group out there that would terminate people like this, I would probably wouldn't be mad about it. If they could just see posts like this and go find people and just get rid of them. I mean, as I don't think we need individuals who think this way in our planet anymore. I really just don't. Especially since, I mean, at the end of the day, put it this way. If you think you are better than other people because you happen to fall out of a white vagina instead of a black one, you're a fucking idiot. And I'm sorry to say, but you're just a fucking idiot. And I don't think there's any room on this modern planet for people that think this way anymore. I think it's a joke, bro. And I'm not saying racism doesn't exist anywhere else. Of course it does. It exists everywhere. But I feel like there's a lot of civilized countries who have gotten more of a control over their racism than we seem to be able to.
There was actually a really good Joe Rogan podcast where he had a former Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink, on his podcast. And one, I think, important point that he brought up specifically is that why don't we spend more time post graduation, post police training academy graduation? How come once they become officers, there aren't continued requirements to maintain a certain level of physical fitness, or taking self-defense classes or jujitsu, so you know how to appropriately hold people instead of choking them out or stepping on their neck? What he was saying is 20% of their time should be spent training, learning how to de-escalate situations, learning how to talk to people, learning how to work in a manner that doesn't escalate and create more problems. And that's this militarized thinking, of putting regular citizens who are oftentimes out of shape, oftentimes not adequately prepared to handle stressful environments. You're putting them into a powder keg and hoping that they know what to do. But I mean, you put any average civilian into a situation where it's fight or flight, one of two things is going to happen. They're going to try and run away, or they're going to try and shoot.
And police officers aren't running away. That's only leaves one of those situations left, right?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, you're right. And this is not necessarily a mark on how they're attacking certain communities more than others. Like, this should be something that we all should be concerned about. White, Asian, Black, Hispanic. Nobody should have to feel like when they're being pulled over, even if you're driving drunk, even if you're doing something stupid, stealing does not equate a death sentence. Using a fake $20 bill does not equate a death sentence. Sleeping in your own bed when they raid the wrong house should not equate to a death sentence. Like, these things are not nuanced ideas. We should have the right to be able to face our accusers or to defend ourselves if we feel like we've been wrongfully accused. And you can't defend yourself if you're dead.
It's true. I thought you brought up a really, really, really strong point too, that it's not just a racial thing. Look, there is obviously systemic racism, and I want to make that perfectly clear. But the real issue here is police brutality, right?
It's the power dynamic.
It's the power dynamic. And like we talk about,
and I think ego, like you mentioned last time, it's a lot of it's power. It's the power dynamic and the ego. You have this, or even less than the ego, because the ego is something that actually functions within like the paradigm of actual civilization. We're talking about the id. This is like the childish, me part of the brain that can't handle being put into a fucking corner.
Yeah.
So they react hyper aggressively.
Yep. It's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. And this is the main thing for police reform. I truly believe psychological testing, evaluation has
Every
to be done
6 months.
in a
Every
longer
6 months.
and a longer training period to begin with, right? I mean, I don't understand why you can basically become a police officer with absolutely no education, and after like a 3-week, mostly physical training course that clearly isn't comprehensive, because if you look at some of the fine specimen that are police officers, a lot of them are not in shape, right? Like I said, we talk about the Wendy's Atlanta incident, right, where you have two grown men who cannot subdue one man who's drunk. So I think 3 to 4 years of training should be at minimum required.
Well, you know what, even if you need people quicker, right? I'm even okay with, rushing through some training, but you should primarily be focusing the training on de-escalation and how to properly subdue subjects, right?
Right.
Not necessarily how accurate are you with a gun, but how can you subdue somebody, using jujitsu or some sort of grappling mechanism that will keep them safe, keep you safe, and the community safe. We're putting people on the streets with, little hand-to-hand combat training, but a very indoctrinated view on how to handle quote unquote thug-like communities.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the Last Week Tonight with John Oliver on police brutality? I would highly recommend watching it. John Oliver's amazing as it is, but
Do you watch the Patriot Act?
What was it?
Do you watch the Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj?
No, I don't.
He actually he did a couple of really good episodes, one about the whole police union, police dynamic, and why reform is important. He actually talks to former police officers, former officers who then went into law enforcement, like on the legal side of things, not the enforcement side of things. And he brings up a lot of really interesting points. And he actually goes into some more about university systems and how those are corrupt, assholes too. But and his delivery is kind of sophomoric, but I will say that the information is pretty useful, which is where some of the information I got the last time we talked about police unions and, qualified immunity. That's where I got a pretty good chunk of it from. So he does a pretty good job of breaking that sort of stuff down, but I'll have to check out John Oliver, because I've been missing a lot of his British humor.
It's really very humorous. Yeah, I've always just been a huge fan there. And his one on police brutality is incredible. And he talks about 3 methods of essentially defunding the police, or 3 things that have to go. And just a lot of statistical evidence. I won't spoil it here, but yeah, just if you get a chance to take a look at it. It's pretty incredible. And in alternatively, I'll take a look at the Patriot Act as well. I'm assuming I could just Patriot Act.
It's on Netflix.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I won't necessarily name drop anybody, but there have been police officers that I know that have spoken to me in one capacity or another, and they endorse the idea of having a better system that enables bad actors to be taken care of. Because here's the thing, inherently what's going to hurt people the most is when you have a system that protects people that are doing the wrong thing, right? And it effectively punishes some law enforcement officials who try to report bad actors. And that can't be the case, man. If you're reporting somebody who's doing something wrong, you should not feel like, we have whistleblower protection laws for a reason. You should be able to freely express if you see something heinous and something that is wrong, given the circumstances of the situation that you're in. You should feel free to be able to report that, and you should feel more like a patriot for doing that than not doing that.
And that's actually one of the things John Oliver talks about. But the problem here is apparently police unions are incredibly difficult, and they protect.
That's what Hassan Minhaj was actually going into depth on, was police unions and qualified immunity.
Exactly.
In some ways, it kind of makes sense that they should have to carry around an insurance card, just like doctors do for malpractice.
I think so.
Because if there's a direct financial tie to your well-being for doing something wrong, you're going to usually have a little bit more of a second thought about it, right?
I've always liked the idea of pulling the settlements, because we pay for the settlement. So every time a police officer shoots and kills a civilian and there's a law settlement, we're paying for it as taxpayers. I've always liked the idea that maybe we could pull this out of pension or something. Not necessarily, I mean, that's a little aggressive, but have some kind of financial consequence for this, and watch, because I guarantee if
honestly, you know what it should be taken from? The union. Because if the union has an inherent financial responsibility to these situations, they're going to do what is necessary to make sure they can protect their coffers, right? So if you have it tied to the union, which then the union has a direct tie to making sure that bad actors are appropriately dealt with, I think you can solve two birds, one stone. You
Mhm.
open up the police union to being a little bit more scrutinized for the way that they protect bad actors, and there's a financial incentive for them to do the right thing.
For the police officers to do the right thing as well, right? So
Yeah,
like,
both
hey,
of them, exactly. It's a
shoot
symbiotic
this person,
relationship.
if I shoot this person, I'm not going to be able to retire. So maybe I will just do my
Well, and
best
not
to.
only that, but like if the union ends up having to pay for that, guess what goes up? Your union dues. So
Right.
it's all a cyclical symbiotic relationship, right? If you take care of one cog, the other one just kind of falls in line because of the financial implications.
Mhm. I like that too. I really do. I think that with any job, right? If you screw up, you should at least get fired. But a lot of times, like if you screw things up, if you're in sales, then you're going to lose a lot of commission. It's the same thing. You should.
Yeah, and you know what? Like I understand that people can make like everyone is capable of making a mistake, right? You can bust through the wrong house, but that shouldn't mean you should just have carte blanche and just start shooting at everybody and anybody that's in there. You
Why
know,
are you shooting somebody sleeping anyway? Like what sense is that? You already have them in their bed. Like
dude,
what could you
she
possibly?
wasn't sleeping, man. She was hiding under the blankets, ready to attack
He was
while
faking
while
it.
snoring. Yeah, she was faking it.
Oh shit, bro. And like, how do you not know? Like, they're not even going in looking for a woman, and they're gonna just open fire on a woman. Like, I get
It was dark.
turn on the
It
lights,
was
maybe
dark inside. It was nighttime.
double check. And I guess the problem was the boyfriend started, I guess, shooting back, and the reason for this is because he thought somebody was breaking into their
Which
home.
is legal in that state.
Absolutely. And you think someone's breaking into your home? I'm gonna shoot my gun too. Like, why wouldn't
They've
you?
dropped the charges against him. So like now that they know that they've done wrong, they've actually dropped the charges against him. So that should automatically indicate that, hey, maybe there needs to be some shit taken care of here because they knew they were wrong. They were so wrong that even though this guy was shooting at police officers, he was in his right to defend his house because it wasn't supposed to be his house.
Wasn't supposed to be anything. So your line of thought process has to be someone's breaking in. It doesn't matter if it's the police. It doesn't matter if it's anything. That's why um, Second Amendment rights exist, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to be able to protect yourself. I mean, in effect, the Second Amendment was created as a means to protect the First Amendment, but in and of itself, it is meant to have an ability to protect yourself against a tyrannical government. And if these
Yeah.
institutions, which are part of the government, are tyrannically barging into your house, yeah, motherfucker, I'm pulling out some fucking sawed-offs. I mean, not me personally because I don't own guns, but I can understand. I can understand the desire and the rationale for doing so.
Sure.
Right? You live in a state, you maybe even live in a community that is not necessarily well kept. You know, you kind of fear for your safety in general. And anytime something happens to a neighbor or a neighborhood that's adjacent to yours, you feel like that could be your house. So you keep yourself strapped. And
Absolutely.
when someone breaks in that you don't know, that isn't announcing themselves, that just busts through the door with a silent, and by silent, I mean they're not saying anything, but the sound of a battering ram crushing through your front door would be reason enough for anybody to start just open firing. It doesn't even matter who it is. You're just going to start going fucking ham.
Yeah, and I like it too. I even as a pretty deep liberal, I have always been pro gun, and it's just that way I feel. I think that we wrote it into the
I
Second
just,
Amendment.
I just don't want those folks owning tanks.
I don't think they need to own AR-15s and tanks, bro. But to own guns is completely okay.
Yeah.
Especially since you know who owns them. Like it seems like who owns the most guns are ex-soldiers who come back overseas, and shooting is just a very de-stressing hobby for them. And these people can take apart a gun and put it together in 10 seconds. They're incredibly
They
responsible.
do it
Not
blindfolded even.
the ones that are going to go around shooting people randomly, for sure. They should absolutely be able to keep guns. People should absolutely be able to keep guns, but
Look, I
it's,
don't feel one way or the other about a responsible person owning a gun. I don't care what it is. Like honestly, even if it's an AR-15, even if it's a fucking Tommy gun, I don't give a shit. If you're a responsible person that has proven you know how the gun operates, you know the safety requirements for it.
This is a roaring 20 Chicago. Like I got my Tommy gun.
Dude,
Woo,
look, man.
Al Capone gang.
Hey, fuck you. I may just buy one just so that I could say I have one, dude. It'll be just an artifact that hangs on my wall that is not fireable because it's 300 years old and doesn't work anymore.
Oh, that's for sure. Thompson submachine guns. Those things are great, bro. Like the St. Valentine's Day massacre flashbacks here.
Nah, but I think sort of in summation, man, it's important that we realize that these needles can be moved, and the only way we're going to move them is by honestly having open discussion and dialogue. And what I fear coming out of this really hyper aggressive cancel culture is that people are not willing to have these conversations anymore. And there are certain things where we don't need to have a conversation. Like, I don't need to have a conversation with you about why being a racist is a bad idea. I don't need that conversation,
No.
but in other respects, I can have a conversation about why it's important to have some sort of policing community or peace officers helping keep people safe. Because when someone robs you and you don't have a means to protect yourself, who are you going to call? Your neighbor? Exactly, right? I'm going to call the fucking Confederate Army to come from the dead to come help me. Like, you know what I mean? It's important to have these dialogues. It's important to have these conversations. But when you start immediately chastising and ostracizing groups of people because you don't want to hear what they have to say, even if you think it's absolutely asinine, the only way you can convince them that the way they're thinking is not necessarily forward is by proving to them through a series of conversations and moving the needle slowly. That's how Daryl, I can't remember his last name, but this dude who is a blues guitarist and musician, he's been able to defrock and convince something like 300 different Klansmen about why about why being a Klansman is a bad idea. Not because he points his middle finger at them and says, you all racist fucks need to die, but by having small conversations that lead to big changes. And maybe it's hard to convince an entire group of people at once, but if you can have those one-on-one conversations with one person at a time, you can slowly start changing the dynamic of how people are thinking. And I think people are, and I know that people are tired. They don't want to keep having the same conversation over and over again, but we need to. It's the only way forward.
It really is. And like you said, like if you just go and kill people, they die racist, right? I mean, nothing ever changed.
Well, and not only that, but like then their kids and family embody that same sort of hatred because somebody that they don't know that doesn't look like them killed their family member.
And make a martyr out of them, right? So, the problem, to your point, though, with the cancel culture that we're going, this is where liberals, I think, are failing because we just want to throw everything away. And that's going to piss off a lot of people. And that's going to be
getting rid of Paw Patrol. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, exactly. What is that? And it's these type of things they're just going to irritate the other side, and they're going to make it so having peaceful resolutions and conversations it becomes implausible, right? Because you're not setting up a room, you're not setting up a chance to sit down and have a conversation. You're not setting up a chance to be taken seriously. And I think that's what's happening critically right at this particular second, right? And the other thing on this note is when you talk about concepts, like I think it's going to require the right or the other side just in general. I don't want to pinpoint the right always, but to get past just the initial movement, right? They hear defund the police and they think no police force, right? They think universal health care and they say, I got to give all my money to the poor. You got to, take away my guns. Well, no, actually, we just want to put restrictions on it to make other people harder to get, right? Or sorry, make guns harder to get for people.
Yeah, or just enforce the laws that we already have.
Enforce the laws that we already have, but again, it's going to take, I think, that side to actually read and sort of become educated, and not just listen to Fox News and derive all of their knowledge from there.
Yeah.
And meet us halfway at the table, and I think that's where it starts.
I think that's the problem that we unfortunately live in with this partisanship issue in general, is that you have to adhere to all of the rallying cries for your side, even if you don't agree with all of them fully, because the goal is not necessarily to be progressive, it's to be right. And that's not necessarily the way to be about it. I think everybody in general wants the same three basic functions, right? We all want to feel safe, we all want to feel secure, and we all want to feel like we're being treated fairly and have the opportunity to progress in our lives, right? And I think without having these conversations and really figuring out where these core issues lie and how we can improve them in totality for everybody, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels. We're going to continue this ongoing tribalistic tendency for partisanship instead of realizing that right, left, progressive, conservative is really not the way to improve, right?
Irrelevant. It should be the best of society. Like a few seconds ago, I admitted I tend to be liberal, but I'm all for gun rights, right? Doesn't mean I'm going to fucking pump my chest and say, no, guns got to be illegal, right? Just because I swing this way in terms of my political views. It's whatever you feel is the best for society overall. And that's how it always should be.
And compromise should be the goal.
Compromise should be the goal.
Because here's the thing, right? We don't need to operate in a binary system of left and right, of right and wrong. We can find, well, okay, maybe right and wrong should be binary, but you know what I mean? Like there's a reason why things operate within a continuum. Things are hardly ever this way or that way. It's usually some sort of superposition of both of them. And the only way to really bring people together is by willing to shake hands with someone who doesn't necessarily think the same way you do, and realizing that, he doesn't have to think exactly the same way I do, and I don't have to think exactly the same way that he does or she does, but we can come to an understanding, about something somewhere in the middle. And the only way you can do that is by hearing the other side out.
Absolutely. I agree with that completely.